former candidate for the U.S. Senate, longtime radio talk show host, author, and conservative policy advocate.
Justices to the Supreme Court, the left has been in open panic.
Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
President Trump and Joe Biden go at it in one final debate. Who won? Who lost? Who knows? With just over a week before an election for the ages. Welcome back into Liberty Nation Radio, a production of LibertyNation.com, as always, and heard from coast to coast on the Radio America Network. The two presidential candidates met in Nashville for one final round of political warfare. We'll bring you the most compelling or significant takeaways on allegations of official corruption by the Biden family, the pandemic, and the future of energy, and how the debate might affect the race down the home stretch. We'll examine the evidence uncovered on the most famous laptop in the world, owned by Biden's son and recovered from a shop in Delaware, and more explosive allegations when we're joined by LibertyNation.com editor-at-large Jim Fight. We will ask the question of whether President Trump is really losing this race, as the mainstream polls suggest. And LibertyNation.com legal affairs editor Scott Cosenza discusses social media censoring of the Biden corruption story and the Supreme Court's refusal to halt the critical battleground state of Pennsylvania from counting ballots for 3 days after Election Day.
Say what? Say what? Say what? One more time.
We kick things off with our signature segment, Say What, where we roll out a virtual assembly line of wacky, astonishing, damnable, and ultimately revealing things uttered by politicians and the chattering class. Of all the issues debated during the second and final head-to-head clash of the presidential campaign, the one that stirred the greatest anticipation was the growing scandal over the Hunter Biden laptop recovered from a computer shop in Delaware, and the direct accusation by a business partner of the Biden family that Joe Biden got a cut of every deal with foreign interests in return for exerting his influence as vice president.
I have not taken a penny from any foreign source ever in my life. I have not taken a single penny from any country whatsoever, ever. There are 50 former national intelligence folks who said that what he's accusing me of is a Russian plant.
You mean the laptop is now another Russia hoax?
And that's exactly what.
Is this
that's
where you're
exactly
going?
what.
This is
told.
where he's going. The laptop is Russia,
Yes.
Gentlemen,
Russia.
I want to stay on the issue of race.
You
okay?
have to be kidding. Here we
Mr.
go
President?
again with Russia.
It will be up to the voters to decide whether this scandal very late in the campaign matters or not. More on that in a moment. But the closest thing to new ground broken in the debate was Trump's question and Biden's open proclamation on the issue of fossil fuels versus renewable energy.
Would he close down the oil industry?
It falls.
Would you close down the oil
By
industry?
the way, I would transition from the oil industry, yes.
Oh,
I will
that's
transition.
a big statement.
It is a big statement.
That's a big
because
statement.
I would stop.
Why would you do that?
Because the oil industry pollutes significantly. It has to be replaced by renewable energy over time.
We have
That's
one
maybe the
final
biggest
question.
statement in terms of business. That's the biggest statement.
Okay.
Because
We have
basically
one
what he's
final
saying
question,
is he is
Mr.
going to
President.
destroy the oil industry. Okay. Will you remember that, Texas? Will you remember that, Pennsylvania, Oklahoma?
Vice President Biden, let me give you 10 seconds to respond, and then I have.
Trump making sure voters in crucial swing states are clear that Biden and the Democrats intend to gut the fossil fuel industry so crucial to their states' economies. But the difference in outlook between the two candidates was arguably the most stark about the pandemic.
It will go away, and as I say, we're rounding the turn, we're rounding the corner. It's going away.
This is the same fellow who told you this is going to end by Easter last time. This is the same fellow who told you that, don't worry, we're going to end this by the summer. We're about to go into a dark winter, He says that we're learning to live with it. People are learning to die with it.
A dark winter. and a dystopian vision of the future, not something ordinarily peddled by a candidate for president. So as the debate fades into the rearview mirror, how long can the elite mainstream media protect Joe Biden from the burgeoning scandal surrounding his family, especially after this bombshell statement right before the debate by one Tony Bubalinski, business partner of the Biden family, which put the lie to Biden's repeated claims that he had nothing to do with his son's overseas businesses and didn't make a dime off them.
I'm making this statement to set the record straight about the involvement of the Biden family, Vice President Biden, his brother Jim Biden, and his son Hunter Biden in dealings with the Chinese. I have heard Joe Biden say that he's never discussed business with Hunter. That is false. I have firsthand knowledge about this because I directly dealt with the Biden family, including Joe Biden. I was introduced to Joe Biden by Jim Biden and Hunter Biden. At my approximately hour-long meeting with Joe that night, we discussed the Biden's history, the Biden's family business plans with the Chinese, with which he was plainly familiar, at least at a high level. On May 13, 2017, I received an email concerning allocation of equity, which says 10% held by H for the big guy.
We shall see whether the elite media blackout on this story will persist. But as bad as the Biden scandal may or may not turn out to be, the brazen censorship by social media of the New York Post story uncovering the scandal was truly breathtaking. And Texas Senator Ted Cruz said it's a 5-alarm fire.
Hunter Biden is not the story here. It's Joe Biden that has potential corruptions with Ukraine. And he's repeatedly denied that he's ever met with Ukrainian oligarchs, and yet these emails suggest that he has. And then the next day, the New York Post broke a second story about what appears to be the potential for direct corruption between Joe Biden and Communist China, and in particular, an offer from Communist China to pay Joe Biden personally millions of dollars. These emails refer to Joe Biden as, quote, the big guy. Big tech, Twitter and Facebook, decided they didn't want the American people to hear this. And so if any American across the country tried to tweet these stories out, tried to post these stories, big tech blocked the stories. And in fact, they went so far as to block the New York Post, a major media company, from posting their own stories.
Cruz and his colleagues are promising to hold hearings and compel testimony from the heads of Facebook and Twitter, promising that the liability protections afforded these big tech companies may soon be in serious danger. We'll talk more about that later on with Scott Cosenza. Earlier in the week, the big gun expected to be pulled out by the Biden campaign entered the fray down the home stretch. Barack Obama, twice elected president and very active on the campaign trail for Hillary Clinton in 2016, and coming out of hiding this time with a virtual appeal to young voters.
In times as polarized as these, your vote doesn't just matter. It matters more than ever before. Joe Biden needs your vote. I know Joe better than almost anybody. I trust him to be a great president. He's different. He's on the right side of the issues. He'll get the job done. And Joe and Kamala will want you to keep pushing them to get the job done.
Now, you would think that Obama's support would make a difference, but over his 8 years as president, he saved himself. But his party did not at all share in his success, losing over 1,000 legislative seats across the country. And his intense campaigning for Hillary Clinton obviously did not help. Obama's first speech came midweek in Philadelphia, where Democrats hope to run up the score and win Pennsylvania. One of the most intriguing questions of this election is whether President Trump can pick up more votes from Hispanics and blacks. He's made a big-time appeal to the black community, did it again in the second debate, emphasizing record-low black unemployment, opportunity zones, his new platinum plan, criminal justice reform, and support for historically black colleges. And he's gotten some help from famous black entertainers, Kanye West, 50 Cent, and the rapper Ice Cube, who was asked by an incredulous Chris Cuomo on CNN how he could possibly work with his president in any way when he rapped about removing Trump just a couple of years ago.
Arrest the president. You got the evidence. That is Russian intelligence.
Now we see a shift. Now he wants to work with President Trump.
I came up with the contract with Black America. Both campaigns contacted me. One campaign said, we love what you have, but let's really dig into it after the election. And one campaign said, we love what you have. Do you mind talking to us about it? And that's what I did. I'm willing to work with both teams, but I'm just working with whoever is willing to work with me.
Trump got 8% of the black vote in 2016 and is expecting to hit double digits this time around. If he does, it could spell the difference in this election. Quick break, and then we'll return to drill down on the growing scandal surrounding the financial dealings of the Biden family and the big guy himself.
Election 2020 Big Bottom Flash Reports are coming. On election night, at the bottom of every hour, LibertyNation.com will give you Election Night 2020, 90 seconds at a time, with our Big Bottom Flash Reports. You'll get the drop with our one-stop shop. Tune into LibertyNation.com on election night for our Big Bottom Flash Reports. At the bottom of every hour. LibertyNation.com.
Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
The problem with having a closet full of skeletons is that once a hand or foot falls out and is seen, the rest are sure to be discovered sooner rather than later. When it comes to the Biden family closet, well, this past week of email reveals confirms what many have suspected for years. It's packed full, and try as they might, there's no pawning it off on the Russians. Those the words of Jim Fight, eloquent writer and editor-at-large for LibertyNation.com, who's been digging down deep on the scandal surrounding Hunter Biden, or more precisely the Biden family, spawned by a treasure trove of emails from the son of the Democratic presidential nominee discovered on a laptop left somehow unclaimed at a Delaware computer repair shop. And Jim joins us now with not the spin, but the basics of this and the facts, the things we know to be true or that have not been denied or found to be false. Jim, welcome back to Liberty Nation Radio.
Thanks, Tim. Yeah, that skeleton in the closet comparison came as I was watching the drip of emails. It was just one after another.
Indeed. So let's start with what's called provenance, or what the police call chain of custody. Can we be all but certain that this is Hunter Biden's laptop, that he was the one who brought it in for repair, and that the emails contained in it, several of which have been released, many of which have been released, are actual emails?
Well, there was some question initially, but, no one at Liberty Nation has had hands on this laptop or verified the emails. So I can't say, I know 100% it's legitimate. But there's certainly more pointing to it being legitimate than not. Could it possibly be a hoax? Sure, but it would be an incredibly elaborate hoax. This guy in the computer repair shop in Delaware claims that someone claiming to be Hunter Biden dropped this laptop off and for some reason never came back to pick it up. He gave that to Rudy Giuliani, and he then turned over the laptop to local authorities in Delaware, and they turned it over to the FBI. And then, of course, he also gave copies to the New York Post.
Now, what about his signature on the work order at that computer repair shop? Is there any talk that the signature, which has been released, we've seen it in the media, Any talk that that was somehow forged or fake?
It doesn't seem like it was. And, you know, in those emails, there were several people named, one of whom was Tony Bobulinski. He has since come out, well, since the allegations came out that it was some sort of a Russian disinformation ploy, he, who has served this country in the Navy, came out with a statement in the New York Post saying, hey, look, this is no Russian hoax. All that is true.
Do we have any explanation at all for why Hunter Biden would have left a laptop with all those incriminating or damning emails unclaimed for over a year when his father was running for president? It almost seems as if he left it there on purpose.
Well, it could be a cry for help situation. We know he was battling addiction, and sometimes people in bad situations do those sort of things to get the attention that they need to get help. On the other hand, you know, some have speculated that maybe it wasn't Hunter Biden himself, but someone in his circle who all of a sudden decided they weren't pals anymore. Oh, I spilled a drink on your laptop. Let me get that fixed for you. A perfect setup. I mean, there's... It seems far less likely that the laptop and emails themselves are fake. And if anything isn't legit, that it would be maybe someone else dropped it off.
So go through for us, Jim, as you did in your coverage of this on LibertyNation.com, the email messages which Americans should find the most troubling.
Okay, well, to break it down, there's, you know, I've said it, Graham Noble has said it, people in other news outlets have said it. The Hunter Biden's behavior specifically isn't what should alarm the electorate. What should alarm the electorate is that these emails seem to prove that Joe Biden did, in fact, allow his son to sell access to him to foreign influencers. And, you know, as I said in my first piece on this topic, the most important questions we can ask here are, if that's true, what did Joe Biden give them that was worth all those millions of dollars to his son as vice president of the United States? I mean, what could make that much money spent worthwhile? And more relevant to the election itself, as opposed to past deeds, if he was willing to do that under President Obama's nose as the vice president, if assuming all of this is true, then what will he sell our potential enemies as actual president? Hunter Biden's job was to make connections with his father. That was, you know, that's the only thing he brought to the company, really.
Jim, thanks for staying on this story. I know you will continue to. I appreciate you joining us.
Thank you, Tim.
Jim Fight, editor-at-large at LibertyNation.com. Quick break, and then we're back to ask the question of whether Donald Trump is really losing this race for president.
Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
The question has lingered over American voters ever since then-candidate Ronald Reagan posed it as a means to bludgeon the floundering President Jimmy Carter in their debate just days before the 1980 election. Are you better off than you were 4 years ago? It caused wavering citizens to think hard. A tight race broke open in the final days, and Reagan won a landslide victory. And yet, when that famous better off question was asked of voters 4 years later in 1984, just 44% of people answered that their lives had improved. Nevertheless, Reagan was reelected with a second overwhelming victory. When Bill Clinton, George W. Bush, and Barack Obama followed on with their own two-term administrations, they all similarly won re-election, with less than 50% of Americans saying they were better off than they were when the first term began. But now comes a recent Gallup poll providing a staggering conclusion entirely at odds with an endless string of polls depicting Trump as an all but certain loser on November 3rd or thereafter. Even in the midst of a pandemic, 56% of the American people say they are better off than they were 4 years ago, while just 32% say their lives have gotten worse. When you stop to consider the disparity between the 56% better off figure and the roughly 44% that represents both Trump's job approval and his average support against Biden in the elite polls, something doesn't add up. One political truism that stood the test of time due to immutable human nature is that people do not vote against their own interests. Could it be that the dozen-point differential between 56 and 44% is largely comprised of those now famous shy Trump voters who understandably don't wish to share their political views with anyone? Could Trump actually cause millions of people to vote against their own improved quality of life strictly because of his personality? Of course, we need to consider the accuracy, or more precisely, the lack thereof, of the same mainstream polls which 4 years ago trumpeted a lead for Hillary Clinton that's looking more similar by the day to the lead Biden is showing this time around. In 2016, the polls told us that Hillary led in virtually every swing state on election eve, and yet she lost multiple states she was predicted to win and was defeated decisively by Trump in the Electoral College. The pollsters broadly admitted after that election that their methodology was broken, yet they've provided no evidence that they have since changed their ways. Thus, there's no good reason to believe they've become reliable again in the even more radically polarized political climate of 2020. But that's not all. There are other signs which belie what the pollsters have been reporting. The enthusiasm gap between the two candidates is more like a gaping chasm, with the president consistently registering 20 or more points ahead of his feckless challenger. In most polls, a majority of Biden supporters say they're voting against Trump rather than for Biden. And surveys over time have shown that most people vote for a candidate, not against one. Trump is playing to crowds of many thousand, and Biden often to gatherings in the double digits on those occasions from time to time where he doesn't place a lid on his campaign's activities early in the day. And Biden is apparently not even trying to generate enthusiasm. He's essentially put a lid on his entire campaign, believing the fact that he is not Donald Trump will be enough, and that running out the clock and freezing the ball will lead to victory. But rarely, if ever, has the candidate that generates the most enthusiasm lost a presidential election, especially when that enthusiasm gap is wide. The backers of Reagan, Bush 43, Obama, and Trump in 2016 were clearly more enthusiastic about their candidate than were their opponents. Then there's the matter of voter registration. It's historically been a reliable indicator of what direction the electorate is headed. The GOP has been gaining voter registration since 2016, while the Democrats' voter rolls have been reduced. In the 67 counties of arguably the most crucial swing state in the election, Pennsylvania, 59 of those 67 have seen a net gain of Republican voters since Trump's election. That's 88% of the counties in the Keystone State. A similar GOP pickup has occurred in North Carolina, while other battlegrounds have seen at least a decrease in the Democrats' registration advantage. It's also worth examining the numbers so far from early voting, which was unquestionably supposed to favor the Democrats and led to loud calls from Trump and Republicans to stop the widespread distribution of unsolicited ballots. And yet, with the information we have now, the information now available, the Democrats' expected advantage of well over 2-1 in early voting at mail-in ballots has not materialized as they had expected at this point. With close to a third of the electorate having already voted, some battleground states such as North Carolina show a surprising number of GOP early voters in what, by all accounts, is a heavy turnout across the country. Even discounting any effect from the final debate or the growing scandal surrounding the enrichment of the Bidens by foreign actors, the reality on the ground may well be clashing with widespread predictions of a Trump defeat. When you combine the unreliability of the polls in the last election with the results of the "are you better off" question, the massive enthusiasm gap, and the pickup in GOP registration, some of the most significant metrics by which past presidential campaigns were almost universally judged, it would be folly for Democrats to believe that this race is over. Quick break, and then we're back to discuss the Supreme Court allowing Pennsylvania to keep counting ballots after Election Day, and the censoring of the stories about the scandal surrounding the Biden family on social media, and what Congress intends to do about it.
Election 2020 Big Bottom Flash Reports are coming. On election night, at the bottom of every hour, LibertyNation.com will give you Election Night 2020, 90 seconds at a time, with our Big Bottom Flash Reports. You'll get the drop with our one-stop shop. Tune into LibertyNation.com on election night for our Big Bottom Flash Reports at the bottom of every hour. LibertyNation.com.
Stay ahead of the curve with LibertyNation.com. With one click, you get tomorrow's news today with LNTV's Hot Topics and Analysis, Liberty Nation Radio, The Uprising and Rabbit Hole podcasts, and dozens of insightful original articles. While the media establishment giants are sleeping, you can stay ahead of the curve with LibertyNation.com and get tomorrow's news today. LibertyNation.com.
Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
And now we have reached a portion of Liberty Nation Radio which we entitle Talkin' Liberty. It is self-explanatory, and let's bring right in our regular contributor, constitutional lawyer, LibertyNation.com legal affairs editor, the man with the longest title in the world, but we prefer to call him our guardian of individual liberty, Scott Cosenza. Welcome back, Scott.
Thank you, Tim.
Okay, big dust up over the Supreme Court and their refusal to grant an emergency stay, giving Democrats a big victory in Pennsylvania in extending the time in which mail-in ballots can be accepted to 3 days after the election. So my basic question to you, is this constitutional? And is it in concert with Pennsylvania's state law as written?
Well, the second question is much easier to answer, and it's no. Pennsylvania law requires that ballots, whether absentee or cast in person, be cast or received by the election boards on Election Day. The Pennsylvania Supreme Court was the judge in a lawsuit brought by Democrats in the state who argued that other provisions of the Pennsylvania Constitution were not met with that part of the law. So that people basically have the opportunity to cast their vote freely is part of the Pennsylvania Constitution. Democrats were able to successfully argue to the Pennsylvania Supreme Court that they were not, that because of the COVID pandemic and the restrictions placed upon people, that wasn't being honored. And then one of the ways to remedy that was to extend the deadline. I want to add, Tim, that Pennsylvania Supreme Court has partisan elections for its justices. So justices for that court, they run as a Democrat, typically, or a Republican. And I think it's a 5-2 split right now, Democrats versus Republicans on that court. I would also add to you that that court is the one that issued me my license to practice law. So I can't say too many bad things about it.
Well, that's about as far as you're evidently willing to go in criticizing the government of the great Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. But
let me. So just to the first question, you asked if it was constitutional, and you did quickly mention that this was they denied a request for a stay. So let's just be clear what this was. This was not a Supreme Court case that they had heard at the United States Supreme Court level. The United States Supreme Court got a request from Pennsylvania Republicans, an emergency request to stay that ruling so it wouldn't go into effect until the case could be heard. And they declined to do so, having tied 4-4, and Roberts aligning with the liberals and with the others, the conservatives, Alito, Thomas, Gorsuch, and Kavanaugh. They actually made sure that their names were known and published the fact that it was a 4-4 disagreement.
Now, come Monday, the composition of the Supreme Court is likely to be different because Amy Coney Barrett is almost certain to be confirmed to the Supreme Court on Monday, 8 days before the election. Is there any recourse for Republicans in Pennsylvania to come back with another challenge to this rule? And if not, what recourse would they have if they object to the tallying of all these mail-in ballots for the 72 hours after the election?
Tim, typically no, unless there's new facts. Now, because this is an election, there's lots of moving parts. There will be some new facts that Republicans can then think justify another bite at the apple to get to the court. Now, we'll see. There are people on the Supreme Court, Tim, who might like to rule one way in this case, but might not like that kind of gamesmanship of the process. These things have to develop as they do. One thing I can tell you is, though, that the remedy for something that hasn't yet occurred may be different than for one that has occurred. So those votes haven't been received yet by the election boards post-election day. Once the vote is cast and they do start coming in, depending on what's done with them, they may have good cause to go back to court. Again, as you say, if that court includes Amy Coney Barrett, and if our suppositions about her are true, she would join the other 4 to make sure that those polls were closed on election day, like Pennsylvania law clearly states. And I don't even think, Tim, that there was one argument by the other side that says that that's not clearly stated in the law. It's a workaround.
Well, if ever there was reason to believe that the addition of Amy Coney Barrett to the court is significant, this ruling, 4-4, certainly confirms it, because John Roberts, as has been his wont increasingly in recent years, sided with the leftists in what could be a crucial decision depending on what happens in the election.
I think that John Roberts would be the first person to tell you they're not Republican judges or Democrat judges. They're just judges.
That's right. He issued that retort to President Trump in an extraordinary public statement by a chief justice. He said there are no Obama judges or Trump judges. And of course, everybody laughed at it because we all know the difference in judicial philosophy and political and constitutional beliefs is crucial to the split in the court. Let's move on to a critical issue in light of Facebook and Twitter literally censoring a critical story from the New York Post, the 4th largest circulated newspaper in the country, about Hunter Biden and his emails and the connection to Joe Biden. And it's now reached critical mass almost in Congress, where they're citing Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act as potentially no longer being able to protect these large social media organizations. What is Section 230 and what's in jeopardy here?
Section 230 has to do with who is declared to be a publisher. And all it does is it grants immunity from being a publisher's status to certain tech companies. So, for instance, YouTube is a perfect example. It relies on user-generated content, the videos that people post on YouTube. If somebody posts a video on YouTube that is defamatory, which is to say they allege certain bad acts were committed by somebody else and that person didn't commit those bad acts. Now, it's one thing if there's sort of public figure exceptions to the law that I know you know, Tim. We won't bore everybody with that for right this second. Let's just say somebody went on a screed against their neighbor who built a fence behind their house that they didn't like, and so they invented a lot of lies about him, sort of a typical neighbor-y thing, right? Well, if they put that video on YouTube and YouTube allowed it to stay up, the neighbor could sue not just the person who uttered the lies, but YouTube for quote unquote publishing those lies. That would mean they are publisher status. Now, before Section 230 was passed, you could either be a publisher or not. And what we mean by that is there was no gray area where you could kind of delete some material or censor some material and not others. But what 230 allowed platforms to do was to say, well, we're going to remove anything that's like totally egregious. So YouTube won't perhaps allow pornography or actual depictions of certain crimes in progress. But for the allegation against the neighbor with the fence, they don't know whether that's true or not. They know that it could be allowed if it were true, and they just allow it to go forth. And it gives them immunity. So if that neighbor sues YouTube, they can say, boom, Section 230, we're immune from this suit. Well, the idea behind 230 was that it would allow voices to flourish, and it wouldn't be used to repress ideas or advance others, but just allow all ideas to kind of flourish. And so Donald Trump in May instructed Ajit Pai, the federal communications chairman who is tasked in the law to kind of monitor Section 230 and articulate rules, to do just that. And we're waiting now, Tim, to see what rules they announce. And I expect there's going to be court fights over it, no matter what the announcement is. And that also Twitter and other social media networks are going to become somewhat less dialed into the social justice warrior scene than they had been.
Let me ask you a common sense question as a civilian. If the definition of a publisher is a site that determines which content will go up and which will not, once they pull down something like the New York Post story, haven't they automatically become a publisher by exercising their judgment about what should be posted and what shouldn't?
Well, Section 230 does not explicitly say that if you do it for political judgment. It always envisioned that the quote unquote publisher, and I think we should use platform here to differentiate whether that platform is legally defined as a publisher for defamation purposes. It doesn't say only for neutral purposes, but that's what was envisioned in the law with the intent, obviously. So the question is, can the intent be applied to the law? It sort of goes back to, I think, a discussion we had last week about judicial philosophies.
Thank you, Scott.
Thanks, Tim.
Scott Cosenza, LibertyNation.com legal affairs editor. This program, Liberty Nation Radio and LibertyNation.com's own podcast, The Uprising, hosted by Scott, and The Rabbit Hole, Politics and Prose, where past is prologue, with our own Mark Angelides, all available on demand at LibertyNation.com and from fine podcast providers everywhere. So that is it for this week, but we'll be back at you next week one more time before the election. Till then, this is Tim Donner saying, stand up for liberty. And we'll see you next time on Liberty Nation Radio.